October 24th, 1944. Philippine Sea. 0938 hours. The USS Princeton, Independence-class light carrier CVL-23, cut through the dark waters east of Luzon with the confidence of a ship that had survived 2 years of war. Her flight deck bustled with activity as Grumman TBF Avenger torpedo bombers prepared for another strike against Japanese positions. Below decks, in the ammunition storage rooms and fuel lines, thousands of gallons of aviation gasoline sat ready. The carrier's General Electric steam turbines hummed at 24 knots. Everything was routine. Everything was controlled. Then the sky tore open. At exactly 9:38 hours, a single Yokosuka D4Y Judy dive bomber, engine screaming, its Aichi Atsuda liquid-cooled V-12 pushing the aircraft into a near-vertical descent, broke through the cloud cover at 8,000 feet. The ship's 5-inch gun crews swung their barrels upward, but the Japanese pilot was already committed. Anti-aircraft fire traced orange lines across the sky, missing by yards. The Judy released one bomb, just one, a single 250-kilogram general-purpose bomb that fell like a dark seed through the morning light. It punched through the flight deck between the elevators, clean, almost surgical. No explosion, no fireball, just the sound of steel tearing and the bomb disappearing into the carrier's guts like a stone dropping into deep water. The flight deck crew stood frozen for 3 seconds, staring at the hole, waiting for the blast that should have come. Nothing happened. The Judy pulled up hard, trailing smoke, and vanished back into the clouds. Sailors looked at each other with confusion, then relief. A dud. It had to be a dud. Lieutenant Commander John Hoskins, the damage control officer, descended into the hangar deck with his team, flashlights cutting through the dim interior. The bomb had penetrated somewhere near the forward elevator, but there was no crater, no fire, no sign of detonation. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. Hoskins radioed the bridge. Bomb impact confirmed. No detonation. Conducting search now. But beneath their feet, in the shadows of the ship's interior, something was waiting. The bomb had crashed through the hangar deck and come to rest near the ship's aviation gasoline storage tanks and the bakery, a strange, almost absurd final resting place. Its impact fuse had failed, but the delayed action mechanism inside was still ticking, still counting down. At 9:45 hours, 7 minutes after impact, the USS Princeton shuddered. Not from an external hit, not from a torpedo. From within, deep within, a muffled thump that resonated through the steel bones of the ship like a heartbeat stopping. Then the fire began. It started as a glow in the hangar deck, a spreading orange bloom that found the fuel lines, the ammunition, the torpedoes armed and waiting on their racks. Within seconds, the interior of the ship became a furnace. On the bridge, Captain William Burricker felt the deck shift beneath him. Smoke began pouring from the forward elevator shaft, thick, black chemical smoke that carried the stench of burning fuel and rubber. The intercom crackled. Fire in the hangar bay! Fire in the hangar bay! All hands to damage control! But the words were swallowed by a second explosion, this one massive, that blew the forward elevator 200 feet into the air, sending twisted steel and flaming debris raining down onto the flight deck. Men ran, some toward the fire, some away. The Avengers, still loaded with bombs and torpedoes, cooked in the heat. Their fuel tanks ruptured, feeding the inferno. The Princeton began to list to starboard as seawater poured into the ruptured compartments, and Captain Burricker made the call every commander dreads. Abandon engineering spaces below the hangar deck. Seal all bulkheads. By 10 hours, the fire was out of control. The USS Birmingham pulled alongside to assist, her crew spraying water onto the Princeton's burning hull, while destroyers circled like nervous wolves, scanning the sky for more Japanese aircraft. Sailors on the carrier's deck jumped onto the Birmingham, some with their uniforms still smoking. Others stayed, wielding hoses, refusing to let their ship die. But deep in the Princeton's belly, something was still burning. Something was still waiting. The torpedo magazine, packed with Mark 13 aerial torpedoes, each carrying over 600 pounds of Torpex high explosive, was heating up. The temperature climbed. The warheads began to sweat. At 15:23 hours, 6 hours after the initial bomb impact, the USS Princeton exploded. Not from another attack, not from a second bomb, from the ghost of the first one. The torpedo magazine detonated with a force that split the carrier nearly in half, sending a mushroom cloud of smoke and debris 3,000 feet into the sky. The shockwave hit the Birmingham like a hammer, shredding her superstructure, killing over 200 men instantly, wounding hundreds more. Body parts and burning metal rained down across the task force. Sailors on nearby destroyers watched in frozen horror as the Princeton, once a symbol of American naval power, became a floating tomb. And in the silence that followed, as the burning hulk began to sink, one question echoed across the fleet. How does a ship explode from a bomb that fell 6 hours earlier?
October 24, 1944, 15:30 hours. 7 minutes after the explosion. The sea around the USS Princeton was a graveyard. Burning oil spread across the water in thick black sheets, and the air tasted like sulfur and scorched metal. The Birmingham, her bridge shattered and decks painted red, limped away with her wounded, while destroyers formed a protective circle around the dying carrier. On the Princeton's tilting deck, the remaining crew, faces blackened, uniforms torn, stared at what was left of their ship. The forward section was gone, simply gone, blown into the sky and scattered across a mile of ocean. The aft section smoldered, listing hard to starboard, groaning like a dying animal. Captain Buracker stood on what remained of the bridge, his hands gripping the rails so hard his knuckles were white. He had commanded this ship through the Marshall Islands, through the Marianas, through Leyte Gulf itself. But now, watching her die, he felt something worse than grief. He felt confusion, rage. How had one bomb, one single bomb that didn't even explode on impact, destroyed a 10,000-ton warship? The answer lay in the carrier's design, though no one aboard knew it yet. The Independence-class carriers like the Princeton had been built fast, built cheap, converted from light cruiser hulls to get more flight decks into the Pacific. Their armor was thin, their compartmentalization was minimal, and their fuel and ammunition storage were crammed together in spaces that would make a safety inspector weep. The bomb that fell at 09:38 had landed in the worst possible place, not because of Japanese skill, but because of American desperation to get ships to the front line. The delayed fuse had given the bomb 7 minutes to settle, 7 minutes to find its way into the ship's most vulnerable arteries. When it finally detonated, it ignited the aviation gasoline stores, which spread fire into the hangar deck, which cooked the bombs on the Avengers, which heated the torpedo magazine. It was a chain reaction, a cascade of failures. The ship killed itself from the inside out. Aboard the cruiser USS Reno, Rear Admiral Frederick Sherman stood in the Combat Information Center, reading the damage reports with growing dread. The Princeton was his flagship's sister ship, and he knew that if it could happen to her, it could happen to any of them. The fleet had been sailing into the teeth of Japanese air power, with ships that were faster, lighter, and far more fragile than the heavy carriers like the Enterprise or the Lexington. They were glass cannons, beautiful and deadly, but one good hit in the right place and they shattered. Sherman picked up the radio handset and spoke directly to Admiral Halsey, commander of the Third Fleet. "We need to reconsider light carrier deployment doctrine. This wasn't just bad luck, this was a structural vulnerability." The line crackled with static. Halsey's voice came back, measured but tight. "Noted, but we need those decks. We need every plane we can get in the air." Sherman didn't reply. He just watched the Princeton burn on the horizon. By 1600 hours, the decision was made. The Princeton couldn't be saved. Her keel was broken, her fires uncontrollable, her list increasing by the minute. The order came down: scuttle the ship. The destroyer USS Reno moved into position, loaded her torpedoes, and waited for the final word. Sailors on nearby ships removed their helmets and stood at attention. Some wept, some just stared. At 1550 hours, the Reno fired 2 Mark 15 torpedoes into the Princeton's starboard side. The explosions were almost gentle compared to what had come before. 2 soft thumps, 2 columns of water rising and falling. The carrier shuddered, rolled further onto her side, and began to slip beneath the waves. Her flight deck, which had launched hundreds of sorties, which had sent young men into battle and welcomed them home, tilted toward the sky one last time before the ocean swallowed it whole. The Princeton sank at 1750 hours, taking 108 men with her. Another 233 had died in the explosions, many of them aboard the Birmingham. It was one of the worst single-ship losses in the Pacific campaign, and it had come not from a torpedo spread, not from a kamikaze, but from one bomb with a faulty fuse that happened to land in exactly the wrong place. But the Navy couldn't let the story end there. Not with morale on the line, not with the invasion of the Philippines still underway. Within hours, the official report was drafted. The Princeton was hit by a dive bomber. She fought valiantly. She succumbed to overwhelming damage. The report said nothing about the delayed fuse, nothing about the ammunition storage, nothing about the design flaws that turned a survivable hit into a catastrophic loss. And in the weeks that followed, as the fleet pressed on towards Leyte and Okinawa, the lesson was quietly absorbed. Light carriers were pulled back from the most dangerous zones. Ammunition storage protocols were revised. Fuel lines were rerouted. But the changes came too late for the Princeton and her crew. Yet, something else lingered. Among the survivors, among the men who had been in the hangar deck when the bomb fell, there was a strange, haunted consistency to their stories. They all described the same thing: the silence, the 7 minutes of silence between the impact and the detonation, the feeling that the ship itself was holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable. Some called it shock, some called it trauma, but a few, late at night in the berthing compartments, whispered something else. The bomb knew. It knew where to wait.
November 3rd, 1944, Pearl Harbor Naval Hospital, 10 days after the sinking. Lieutenant Commander John Hoskins sat in a wheelchair by the window, his left arm wrapped in heavy bandages, his face still bearing the scorch marks from the fire. He had survived the Princeton's death by jumping into the sea just before the torpedo magazine exploded, swimming through burning oil until a destroyer crew fished him out. But survival didn't feel like victory. It felt like punishment. The hospital ward was full of men like him, men from the Princeton and the Birmingham, men with missing limbs and hollow eyes. Some screamed in their sleep. Others just sat in silence, staring at walls, replaying the moment over and over. Hoskins did both. Every night he dreamed of the hangar deck. Every night he descended into the shadows with his flashlight, searching for the bomb. And every night he found it, just sitting there, waiting. A Navy chaplain visited him on the 3rd day, offering comfort and prayer. Hoskins let him talk, but when the chaplain asked if he wanted to confess anything, Hoskins shook his head. "I don't need forgiveness," he said quietly. "I need answers." The chaplain frowned. "Answers to what, son?" Hoskins looked out the window at the rows of gray warships in the harbor, identical and infinite. "How do you design a ship that kills itself? How do you send men to war in something that fragile?"
The official inquiry into the Princeton's loss concluded in December. The report, stamped confidential and filed in a Washington vault, confirmed what the survivors already knew. The bomb had penetrated the flight deck and come to rest near the aviation gasoline storage. Its delayed action fuse had malfunctioned, giving it 7 minutes instead of detonating on impact. When it finally exploded, it triggered a fire that reached the torpedo magazine, causing the catastrophic secondary explosion. The report recommended changes to ammunition storage procedures and carrier design. It praised the crew's bravery. It closed the case. But it didn't answer the question that haunted Hoskins and the others. Why that bomb? Why that moment? Why 7 minutes? Just long enough for the crew to think they were safe. Just long enough for rescue ships to pull alongside. Just long enough to maximize the casualties when the end came. The Navy's official position was clear. It was chance. War is chaos. Ships sink. Men die. The Pacific was full of such tragedies. The Wasp, the Hornet, the Gambier Bay. The Princeton was just another name on a very long list. But Hoskins couldn't accept that. He had been in that hangar deck. He had felt the ship holding its breath. In the years after the war, survivors of the Princeton scattered across America, carrying their memories like shrapnel that couldn't be removed. Some never spoke of it. Some spoke of nothing else. Hoskins became a civilian engineer, designing systems with obsessive redundancy, backup pumps, secondary power supplies, firewalls between fuel and ammunition. His colleagues thought he was paranoid. He thought he was being responsible. In 1967, during the USS Forrestal fire, another carrier disaster caused by a chain reaction of explosions, Hoskins sat in his living room and watched the news footage with a face like stone. His wife asked him what was wrong. He didn't answer. He just turned off the television and walked outside into the cool evening air, looking up at the stars. The Princeton had taught the Navy a lesson, but lessons written in blood are easy to forget. New ships were built. New wars were fought. New men descended into hangar decks, trusting that the steel around them would keep them safe. And sometimes it did. But sometimes a single bomb found the single worst place to land, and everything that followed was just gravity. The wreckage of the USS Princeton lies in 1,500 fathoms of water off the coast of Luzon, beyond the reach of salvage or remembrance. Her guns are silent. Her engines are cold. Her flight deck, which once sent young men roaring into the Pacific sky, is now a reef for fish that have never known war. But somewhere in the deep, in the twisted metal and scattered bones, the question remains. How does a ship explode from a bomb that fell 6 hours earlier? The Navy answered with engineering reports and design changes. Historians answered with tactical analysis and casualty lists. But the men who were there, the men who felt the silence between the impact and the detonation, they had a different answer. The ship was already dying. The bomb just gave it permission. And on quiet nights, when the ocean is calm and the moon is dark, sailors in the Philippine Sea sometimes report strange things. A glow beneath the waves, a sound like distant thunder, the ghost of a carrier that refused to go quietly, still burning, still fighting, still asking why. The USS Princeton was never hit by a torpedo. She was never struck by multiple bombs. She was killed by one bomb in one moment because she was built to be fast and light and expendable. She was a ship designed for a war that needed bodies more than it needed safety. And when the moment came, when the delayed fuse finally clicked and the fire began, she did exactly what she was designed to do. She burned brightly, and then she was gone.